So we've discussed many times before, and that's what is mentioned by the Shalah, the author of the Shalah, who wrote the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, one of the most important Kabbalah commentaries on the Torah, from Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz. He writes that every parsha not only is it connected, does it have a theme for the time that we are living in, but it's connected to the week that it's being read in. As you know, after every Torah portion on Shabbat, we also read a Haftarah. Haftarah is a selection from the prophets. So Moshe instituted that 3 days in succession should not go by without the Torah being read in public. That's why the Torah is read on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat. On Monday and Thursday, 3 people are called to the Torah. There are 3 aliyot. It's really the first aliyah until Sheni. That's divided into 3 parts. And on Shabbat, we call 7 people to the Torah. There's an 8th, which is the maftir, but for different time. But the minimum that needs to be called is 7 on Shabbat. It's based upon an idea of the Torah that says the Jewish people were traveling for three days and they couldn't find water, and it says that the Talmud says that the water is a metaphor for Torah. Just like can't live without water, we cannot live without Torah. So 3 days is the maximum we can go in succession. That's why it was instituted that we shouldn't have more than 3 days go by. Reading the Torah is supposed to ground us. Not that we don't study on Sundays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but by forcing the Jewish people to come together on within every 3 days to study Torah, to hear the Torah, it would keep them connected. There was a period of time where reading the Torah in public, for the Jews to gather to read from the Torah was outlawed. And so it was instituted that a selection from the Nevi'im, from the prophets, would be read, and that would be similar in theme to the Torah portion.
Were all the prophets after Moses then?
All the prophets were after Moses, right? So we're talking about from Yehoshua, Shoftim, Malachim, but many of the prophecies are from Yeshaya, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, but they run the gamut of all the different prophets, from Malachim, from Shmuel. So different haftarahs were selected because the theme, the story, or the message would be similar to the theme of the parsha that couldn't be read in public. And in this way, we would still get the message on some level by gathering all the Jewish people, and they would read the haftarah together. This went on for a period of time until the decree was lifted. There's a discussion about who. It was a Persian emperor, it was a Greek emperor, but it seems like there were 2 different times when we were not allowed to read Torah in public, and certain prayers were actually outlawed. They would send in spies. And I don't know if you noticed that on Shabbat, on Shabbat there's a prayer called Musaf. Musaf is the additional prayer that we do after the reading of the Torah. The word Musaf literally means addition, and it's because on Shabbat there was additional service in the temple. So since the prayers that we do today are instead of the service of the temple, we no longer have a temple, so we have on Shabbat, because of the additional service, we have what's called Musaf, an additional prayer to correspond to the additional service. In the repetition of the Amidah of Musaf, we say the Shema in the Amidah. It's really out of place. We sing it here in Shul, but most shuls sing it together. But when the Chazan repeats Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Why? So one of the reasons is because in the morning service there was a period of time when there were spies that were making sure the Jewish people were not reading Torah, saying Shema. And they knew that this is when the service comes. The Shema is in the morning prayer. It's always the Shema is in the Shachar. So the rabbis moved the Shema to the Musaf for a period of time. After these people left, they saw the Jews were not saying Shema. They were behaving. But we just said Shema. We just said Shema in the later service. But even though after the decree was abolished, the Shema was left in the Musaf prayer.
Why the decree?
Why was there a decree? I'm not sure how to answer that question because throughout history, there have been numerous places that we've lived that have tried to abolish Torah, and there were certain observances that they always tried to stop, to prohibit first. We know that there was a Persian emperor called Yezdegerd, Antiochus of the studies of Greeks, the story of Hanukkah. They wanted the Jewish people to stop studying Torah and assimilate with the culture. And they figured that they can solve the Jewish issue if only we can get rid of Torah, because the Torah is what keeps the Jewish people distinct and separate. And so by abolishing and prohibiting the Jews to study Torah, listen, that the Romans did it. Every power that had control over the Jewish people attempted to do it. No one was ever successful. The Romans forbade it on penalty of death. Rabbi Akiva was caught and was skinned alive. He was executed in public with 9 other rabbis for the sin of studying Torah. Right? But the Jewish people persevered, and another community popped up, and it continued. And it's been like this for thousands of years, where communist Russia just recently, when I say recently, after the Bolshevik Revolution, what they started throwing in prison and killing rabbis and scribes. That was they wanted to wipe out. They were against all religion, but they had a special place for Jews because they wanted to eliminate the Jewish faith. And what did Jews do? Many of them went underground. This happened in Spain and during the Inquisition, the same thing. It's happened time and time again throughout history. So the question is, why do they prohibit Torah? They don't understand how wonderful it is. Maybe they have regrets that they didn't get the Torah. Maybe, as the Medrash says, that God offered them the Torah first, and they said no. And they say, if we can't have it, nobody should have it. What is it really? It's really the Jewish people are the symbol of God's immanence in this world. That we refuse to bow down to the culture of the dominant culture of the day and say that no, that we are still loyal to the Torah. And so is it the Jewish people? It's really probably humanity's attempt to push God away. And since the Jewish people are the most visible representation of that we still live our lives day to day, moment to moment by God's dictates, and we call ourselves God's people, that's the irritation. And we studied about this on Shavuos. I don't want to go. We're starting late, and we're going to go late again. But the Talmud says that Mount Sinai it's called the mountain of hatred. Har Sinai comes from the word Sinai, which means hatred, because when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, God caused the Jewish people to become hated at that moment, right? It's in a sense God created anti-Semitism. So it's not millions of people over thousands of years have tried to dissect to figure out what is the source of anti-Semitism. Why? Where does it come from? It's not racial in any sense, because the Jewish people are not a race, right? Although many people may think the Jewish people are a race, but we know the Jewish people are not a race. The Jewish people is a belief system made up of nationalities, ethnic. As a matter of fact, anybody who wants to join the Jewish people and accept upon themselves to live by its dictates becomes a full Jew like everybody else. And so, it's one can't say that the animosity to Judaism is based upon skin, or ethnicity, or background, or history. Jews live all over the world. Comes from so many different cultures. What is it? It's about God created it. We didn't create it. God created. God put a target, a bullseye in our back, because we said we represent God. And so, if you want to take out God, if a person wants to live without morality, without discipline, without instruction, right? The Talmud says, there's a famous saying in the Talmud that says, "Avda behefkera nichalei," that a servant, or literally means like a servant or a slave, wants to be free. It's the nature of human beings, we want to be free. What does Torah do? Torah ties you down. Torah tells you from the beginning, from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, how to live a life. Who wants to live a life like that? And so human beings don't. When we see other people living like that, it takes us off. But because it's a visual reminder that that we can't live up to that standard, or that there are people who are so stubborn. But if we get rid of them, then we get rid of God. And this is probably what it's been like that from the time of Haman, from the time of Pharaoh, from the time of Hitler, from Stalin. You pick the name, pick the country, pick the era, and it's the same thing time and time again. It was always about eradicating the idea of what our belief system is, and when we wouldn't assimilate, when we wouldn't change. Haman's complaint to Achashverosh was that we are distinct people who live all amongst all your peoples, but we have our own rules, we have our own cuisine, we have our own. We don't mingle, and that we refuse to follow the dictates of the ruler when it contravenes Torah. And that's what, yeah.
Can I ask a question? What is the best response, in your esteemed opinion, to that type of energy? Like, if you get energy from people in modern times that seems as though it's not positive or supportive because you are a Jew, or because you are trying to live a holy life in this world, what's the best response to that? I mean, that's maybe a vast question, but
Yeah, so
just in daily interaction.
we live in a unique time. We don't appreciate this. The experiment of America. It's really the first time in history where people have been allowed to live as they want to live, without being oppressed for making those kind of choices. The best answer, I don't know that there's one answer for everybody, but if people really want to understand, rather than just getting into an argument with vitriol, and it's not going to, that doesn't change anybody's minds. But to sit down with people and respectfully say that we believe that life is not random. We believe that life is not, we're not here just for a short period of time, and then life is meaningless, and we're just on a train, and we try to grab and accomplish as much as we can and flame out. But God puts us here. God created this world, and every single person has a mission to accomplish. And the most precious resource we have is time. And we try to figure, our Creator, who created us and created the world, gave us a blueprint for how to live an optimal life, and to not just physically but spiritually recognize that we are a composite of these two parts, and therefore we live by those dictates, because we truly believe that's not only the most spiritual way, it's also the most fulfilling way to live, as a physical life as well. But like all things, I mean, people can understand it if they want to think rationally. If in every discipline in life, it's a very distinct minority that commits on a high level. You can think about whether it's in sports, whether it's in arts, whether it's in medicine. The people who are to achieve success requires a tremendous amount of discipline. Right? Mm-hmm. Right? You can't just wake up and run a marathon. You can't just wake up and become a heart surgeon and say, right? And so you can poke fun and hate all the people who get A's, right? But the idea is that we know that there's only a small percentage in every class that's going to achieve that. And why? Because most people don't have the discipline that's required day in and day out to train, to study, or to live a certain lifestyle, right? That if you want to achieve this, I have to abstain, right? If you want to be an athlete, you can't eat whatever you want, right? You say, well, it's not fair. It's what kind of life is that? Life is boring. Why? Who would want to sign up, right? But people say that the discipline is that I believe that life, it's hard now when I'm training. When I get to that plateau, it's much more fulfilling than giving in. Mm-hmm. I'm being a slave to today, to the right now. So in Deuteronomy, in the Torah, God tells the Jewish people, before there was Christianity, and before there was Islam, before there were these super nations, religions, God prophesies to the Jewish people that we will be a minority. God says, I chose you not because there's many of you. You can look at, it's an amazing statement for the Torah to write, because at that time, no one could have conceived that the Jewish people would be a minority, right? Because there were no, but it's in the portion of Et Hanan. God, we're going to read this in 2 weeks. God says, not because of your numbers I chose you. Ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. God says, you are the fewest of all the nations on earth. God says, wow, what a statement to make. Thousands of years, right? God says, and it's always going to be that way. And in that nation, those who are disciplined and those who are keeping it are a minority of that minority. But that is true in every year life. We look up to the people who have achieved. We say we don't think about what it takes to get, but we do know conceptually that to achieve something requires preparation, requires discipline, and requires making choices. And saying that to abstain from this is because I want to achieve this. It's not just abstaining from something. There's a purpose, there's a plan, there's a goal. And Judaism tells us that to create a harmonious connection of body and soul, and to live by the way that God wants us to live, our Creator, who fashioned us, who understands and knows what our purpose is giving us a blueprint to live that way. Why wouldn't we take advantage of it? Is it hard? Of course it is. But nothing worth achieving, it comes easy.
Thank you.
But yeah, most people don't like to see, what's the communist ideology? Nobody wants to see a small people successful at the expense of everybody else. So what it really is in modern parlance is we'll make everybody miserable, put everybody in the same boat together. Mm-hmm. But it's the fact is that's the people that are willing to live a certain way for a deferred goal are a minority, but that's true in every field. We are emblematic of that in a religious sense, but we can look. You sit down with people and you see, look around the world and you say, why aren't people jealous of LeBron James? I'm going to give you an example, or this athlete or that athlete. Do you know that he cannot eat cheeseburgers whenever he wants? You know how miserable he must go. And he goes out with his friends and they're eating pizza. And he goes, well, if I eat that slice, I have to go for another extra hour and a half to the gym. Or this person says, I have to, I can't go out with you because I have a finals, because I have a medical exam or I have a bar exam, and so I'm not going to sit and party because, right? They say, oh, well, what a loser, what a this, you only live once, but it's people who are going to live that way understand that they're going to sacrifice some things, but the sacrifice is not because it's not irrational. It's perfectly rational to understand that there are trade-offs in life, sure. Right? So the same thing is true, that we recognize that we have a spiritual component to us, and there are trade-offs. If we want to ignore it, we ignore it at our own peril. But most people are spiritually deaf to that music, so to speak. And the Jewish people were the ones that God gave that mission to. And in the Jewish people themselves, there's only a minority of people who are playing ball, so to speak. But that doesn't make it any less legitimate. It's actually the reverse. If you want to know the truth, if you want to understand the essence of truth about in every discipline, you don't look to the majority. The majority are generally wrong, because the majority of people are never going to be. I'm going to use the word disciplined. The majority, the truth never doesn't live with the majority, right? We've always known that it's the minority of people who change, who transform, who invent, right? The inventors of the world are a handful of them. So, we're the inventors of living a physical life by spiritual dictates that seem irrational, but just because everybody else is not doing it has never impressed upon us that, hey, if nobody else is doing it, it must not. No. God told us, you're going to be a minority. So we celebrate that. Okay. So going back to the point that the Shalah writes, that the Haftorah, that's where we started. The Haftorah was instituted as a replacement for the Torah when we couldn't study the Torah. Eventually, when the decree was rescinded, it was left in on Shabbat, so we read the Haftorah in addition to the Torah portion. And so if you look at every Haftorah, you'll see that there's a theme that's similar to the parsha. In the English In the back, but when you get to the Haftorah, it always tells you what the connection to the parsha is. That stops this week. So this is true of all the parshas of the Torah, except for the last number of weeks of the summer. What's happening now? We are entering a time known of the 9 days. We started the 3-week period, right, of the fast of the 17th day of Tammuz. And this Shabbat, this weekend, begins the period of 9 days leading to Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which will be a week from this weekend, a week from Shabbat, which culminates this period of the mourning of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. This is what this time of the calendar signifies. And so the Haftorahs were switched to discuss the theme of Jerusalem and the theme of loss. So this past week, this coming week, and the week after are known as Shlosha de Puranata. There are 3 Haftorahs that we read from Jeremiah. Jeremiah, in Hebrew, his name is Yirmiyahu. What does Yirmiyahu mean? I want you to know that in Hebrew, many of the names are not the original birth names. They're names, because a name tells us about the character of a person. Moshe wasn't, right? His name was not Moshe. That was a name that was given to him by his adopted mother when she pulled him out of the water. Moshe had a different name that his parents gave him.
What was it?
I can't tell you.
Do you know?
Rashi said Moshe was known by had 7. There's a theory that Moshe had 7 names. The name that his parents gave him is a matter of dispute, but there's a number of different opinions whether it was Tuvia or Tov. But Moshe, we know the Torah tells us, was given to him. The word Moshe is actually an Egyptian name, it's not even a Hebrew name. Think about how many millions of Jews over the history have been named Moshe after Moshe. It's one of the most popular. You can't get more Jewish than Moshe, right? But Moshe's Egyptian. Kimin Hamaya Mishitiyu, the Torah says. She named him Moshe because she drew him from the water, an Egyptian. That was not Moshe's birth name. But many of the names of the Torah are names that signify an event, a major event that happened in their lives. Yirmiyah.
God will raise up.
What are we talking about now?
I'm guessing what the name is.
Yirmiyahu.
Which name? Yirmiyahu?
Yeah.
No, the word the Yirmiyah comes from the word mar, which means bitter. Right? It's actually mar means bitter. The Torah tells us that the Jews couldn't drink water. Ki marim heim. The water was bitter. It's the same root of the name Miriam. The Miriam and Yirmiyahu are the same root. It means bitter. Yirmiyahu, Miriam, because she grew up, she lived during the most bitter time of the Jewish people's time in Egypt. She witnessed to the genocide, and she was there. They got divorced because they wanted to have more children, because they were afraid that they were going to lose them. Miriam was actually the one who convinced her parents to marry Moshe, who never would have come into the world to begin with.
They were divorced.
Moshe's parents separated, because Pharaoh gave a decree that any child who's born is being thrown into the Nile. So Moshe's parents separated, and Miriam was a young child. The Talmud is that she was very smart. But she had a little bit of chutzpah too. She went to her parents, and she said, "You're worse than Pharaoh." She says, "Pharaoh's decree with the males to only throw the boys into the Nile. By you separating and not having any children, maybe you'll have a daughter. What do you right? 50-50. So she convinced her, and the Talmud said that she was the one who walked with her parents down to the chuppah. She was only 6 years old. She was a kid. But she convinced her parents to get together again, and because of that, and from that union, Moshe was born. That's why Moshe himself always besides being a sibling, Moshe always looked up to Miriam. He had a special place for Miriam always, because Miriam was really responsible for him being born in the first place. But he was also she was 6 years older than him.
But Miriam and
Yirmiyahu, the prophet
the
Yirmiyahu,
same thing.
the root of the Hebrew root, the Talmud says that wasn't his name. He was called Yirmiyah because all his prophecies are about doom. He lived in a very, very difficult time. Jeremiah lived during the end of the first temple era, when the Babylonians were closing in, and he foresaw the destruction. And his job was to go and get the Jewish people to repent and tell them to change. And he accuses them of terrible things. I mean, even though they were studying Torah, but the Talmud says that the first temple was destroyed because the Jewish people were worshiping idolatry, sexual immorality. They were deceiving in business. They weren't honest. I'm talking about as a general rule. And Jeremiah was chastising them that they were not treating the widow and the orphan with compassion. They were not living by the precepts of the Torah. And so Jeremiah was actually put in prison by the Jewish king. He didn't want to hear about it. Yirmiyahu was giving prophecies even from prison. He had a very bitter life, and he lived during a very, very bitter time. And nobody wanted to listen to him. Who wants to listen to doom and gloom? Who wants to listen? People want to listen to optimism. It's going to be good. Yeah, you guys are great, but that wasn't true. So what do you do? They silenced him. They threw him in prison. They threw him in a pit. They beat him. It was regardless. Yirmiyah is the one who wrote the book of Lamentations that we recite on Tisha B'Av. The book of Eicha is one of the 5 scrolls. It was written by Jeremiah as well. Jeremiah was one of the more prolific prophets, and so. But the dominant theme of all his prophecies are sometimes very difficult to read because it's very, very mournful, and it's biting, and it's critical of the behavior of the people that he's addressing, because they weren't. So you can look at it half term, you get a sense of his language, very poetic and brilliant prose, but it's tough reading.
How much longer after Moses was him?
You talk about it's almost 1,000 years.
1,000 years?
Yeah. So Jeremiah, we read for 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, we read 3 prophecies from Jeremiah. From after Tisha B'Av, we read 7 weeks in a row from Isaiah. Isaiah, the Hebrew name of Isaiah is Yeshaya. Yeshaya means God will save. Whether that was his real name, God will save. Yeshaya, Isaiah, are prophecies of reconciliation. Isaiah was as chastising and as mournful as Jeremiah is. Yeshaya, Isaiah, is exactly the opposite. It's going to be good. He talks about messianic time. God will, and so for 7 weeks after Tisha B'Av, God sends Isaiah to give comfort. And so the way the Haftarah system works is that we read 3 weeks of punishment, and then 7 weeks of consolation. So the haftarahs of the next 9 weeks are not connected to the parsha at all, but they revolve around the theme of the time that we are living in, going during the next 9 weeks leading up to right before Rosh Hashanah. That from now to the end of the summer is 2 more weeks of rebuke, and then 7 weeks of consolation after Tisha B'Av. Nevertheless, the Shalah says it can be that it's random anyway, even though that there might not be an overt connection to the parsha, there must be still a connection to the parsha that we're reading in, that's connected to the time of the year that we are in right now. So I want to talk about a couple of different themes of this, and as you know, we have two different parshas. I do have to confess, V asked me before I left, I went to visit V in the hospital on my way here, and she asked me to give her a preview, a mini class. So I gave her 20-25 minutes of Parsha, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of a nutshell what I told her, because I'm going to try to condense, because there is a lot of stuff here, but there are 2 big stories, or two big themes, I would call them. The first one is the Torah tells us one from each parsha. There's more, but it's okay. One of the major stories takes place towards the end of Parashas Mattos on page, and it's the story of 2 tribes who come to Moshe, and they want to remain on the eastern side of the Jordan. It's the tribe of Reuven, the tribe of Gad, and right, who come to Moshe. Tremendous, abundant livestock, very great, and they were wealthy. They had a lot of cattle, they had a lot of sheep, and they understood that when they crossed the Jordan, the land of Israel at that time was not that fertile. They didn't have a lot of good grazing land, but the land that they were in on the plains of Moab, on the eastern side of the Jordan, had good grazing hills and valleys. And they come to Moshe and they say, "I want to have a proposition for Moshe." And they say, "We are willing to forego our inheritance, our portion in the land of Israel, because it won't sustain our herds. let us remain here, and this will be our territory. Moshe gets very angry, and in a very classic line, Moshe says, if you look at verse number 6, Moshe says to the children of Gad and the children of Reuven, "Shall your brothers go out to battle while you settle here?" What kind of deal is that? How insensitive can you be? You know the land of Israel is not going to come easy, right? The people are not opening the gates. We're going to have to drive the Canaanite nations had to be conquered and driven out from the land. So what do you? Maybe Moshe originally thought maybe they're afraid, maybe they didn't want to deal with it. So the rest of the Jewish people should go out to battle, and you stay here because for this everybody fought for, right? The land of Sichon and Og were just conquered. That everybody had a hand in, and so Reuben and Gad said, "Okay, we're good. We'll stay here," right? So Moshe says no, but then Moshe goes even further. Moshe says, "Why are you dissuading the hearts of your brothers? You do the same thing that your fathers and your grandparents did, and because of that, we got stuck in the desert for 40 years. Because the bottom line is, by staying here, the message that you're sending is that we don't have the heart to cross the Jordan and go into Israel again." And so Moshe is comparing what they're asking for, exactly to the sin of their ancestors, would put them in the place to begin with for 40 years. He says, "This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to the land. They went up to the valley of Eshkol, and so they dissuaded the heart of the children not to come to the land that Hashem had given them. This is the land, not this land that you want. The land that Hashem wants to give you is the other side of the Jordan. And the wrath of Hashem burned on that day. And he swore, if these men who came from Egypt, from the age of 20 and above, will see the ground that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they had not fell, except for Kalev, the son of Yefuneh, the Kenizzite, and Yehoshua ben Nun, only they follow Hashem fully." Right? So Moshe telling them, you're out of your mind. Right? What kind of question are you asking me? Of course I'm not going to let you stay here. For twofold. Number one, it's not fair. You have to share in the battle for the land of Israel. Everybody shared in this land here, and you can't stop here now that we're so close. Number two, how are you're reneging the land of Israel itself? This is what our whole journey has been about. And not that long ago, your fathers did the same thing. You know what happened to them? This is why we're still here for 40 years. If not, we would have been in Israel. We would have been in Israel in 11 days. That's how long the journey should have taken to get from Egypt to Israel. 11 days. And yet, 40 years later, only because they said, it's okay, we don't need Israel's, we don't need it. So they respond to Moshe as follows. That was not our intention. They tell Moshe, they say, listen, in verse 17, we shall arm ourselves swiftly in the vanguard of the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And in verse 18, we should not return to our homes until the children of Israel will have inherited every man's inheritance, for we shall not inherit them across the Jordan and beyond. So, etc., etc. It's a very, very long discussion, and I know this is a class, and classes are made to have the discussion, but we're going to run out of time. This is a very, very fundamental story to understanding many. This is a big story that I encourage all to study and understand, because it's actually a mind-blowing story and conversation that Moshe is having with them. They told Moshe that no, you misread what we are asking. We're not asking to get out of jail. What we're asking is that we're giving up the land. We want to keep this land, but it was never our intention not to go fight with everybody else. We're going to fight, and we will not return home onto this side of the Jordan until every single tribe will have inherited their land and they have settled. Once the entire land of Israel settled, only then we'll go back across the Jordan. So Moshe says, listen, if that's the case, Moshe listens, he goes, I'll take that deal. But Moshe wasn't going to be alive to enforce it. Moshe knew that he wasn't himself going to Israel. So he calls Joshua and Elazar, who was the high priest who took over for Aaron. Aaron had just passed away as well. And Elazar, his son, had taken over. So he says that you're going to be there. And this is the Tanai, this is the condition. If these two tribes when we go to Israel, they will remain in Israel until the entire land of Israel is conquered and settled, and they fight alongside. Then they can go back and take that land. But if they don't get that land. They're not getting it. Eventually what happened was that they kept their word, that they went and they fought, and they did not return until the land of Israel. Now, it took 14 years. It took 7 years to conquer the land, and it took another 7 years to properly apportion the land and have everybody settle the land of Israel. For 14 years, these two tribes did not go home. They stayed in Israel. Only 14 years later, after everything else was calm, did they go back across the Jordan. This is it's a classic story, and this is one of the stories that the commentaries struggle to understand what really happened here. Why did these two tribes really care about grass? I mean, they wanted to give up the land of Israel because they had sheep and goats. I mean, first of all, they had no way of knowing what was on the other side of the Jordan. There was just as good grass there. And even if they had a way of knowing, right? You spent 40 years in the desert. Where are we going to Israel? I mean, it's like saying that you wait for something for 40 years, and when you're one exit away, you say, okay, I'm good, I'll stay. I'm gonna go to the Best Western here. I'm good. It's too much to go, one more exit, right? I mean, it's so illogical that and they knew that this was what God wanted. God wanted them to go to the land of Israel. That's not the land of Israel, the eastern side of the Jordan.
Did they get apportioned their own part of Israel?
No, they didn't get a section of the land of Israel.
They didn't.
No. This was their section. They wanted a section. They got their section on the other side of the Jordan. So there's a lot going on here, but I just understand that there's always many undercurrents to what was going on, and the reason why Moshe was very harsh with them only becomes clearer later on when Moshe's passing away. That's when Moshe realizes what was really happening here. So I've discussed it before, and maybe I spoke about it in Shul and the other classes, but these two tribes understood that Moshe was going to pass away and was not going to the land of Israel. What they wanted to do was they wanted to create a situation where Moshe would actually be in the land of Israel. So how would they do it? The story of the goats and the sheep and the land was a pretext. They wanted to expand the boundary of Israel to the other side of the Jordan and make that part of Israel, greater Israel. And this way, Moshe, who's buried, is actually in Israel by default because the land was expanded because these two tribes were going to go under. And they really wanted to have the land of which Moshe was going to be buried in. That section of land was more valuable to them where Moshe was going to be buried than anything on the other side. And they, in a sense, the Talmud says they didn't want to abandon Moshe. Moshe, who was there for them, they felt that it would be abandoning him by everybody going into Israel. So they couldn't tell him that. Now Moshe, in his great humility, it seems like he didn't see that in the beginning, that the two whole tribes would want to stay behind just to keep him company and be with him, and give up that dream of Israel. But at the end, he realized what it was about, and
why couldn't they tell him?
Because Moshe never would have agreed to it. Because Moshe was a faithful servant of God. Moshe never would have put personal consideration above anything else. God said, "This is where you have to go," and you see, Moshe says he lambastes them. He says, "This is what your fathers did." He calls them wicked. How can you do? He says, "How can you do such a terrible thing, but not wanting to go in the land of Israel?" Moshe says, "If I had that opportunity, I'm begging God to let me in." Right? But in a way, at the end, this becomes, one can say that Moshe did go into the land of Israel, because what happens is that God tells Moshe that when the time of the Mashiach will come, the boundaries of the land of Israel will be expanded to include those lands in the eastern side of the Jordan will become part of proper Israel. If you can, Moshe says it in allegory. If you look on page 119, and the final blessing that Moshe is giving the tribes right before he passes away. This is the last Torah portion of the whole Torah. And so to
1019.
I'm sorry, 11:19. 11:19.
11 or 9?
11:19. 1119. That's what it's very briefly. It's not that's to understand how Moshe actually blesses them at the end. See, he tells the tribe of Gad, verse 21. He chose the first portion for himself. The first portion was the first land, for that is where the lawgiver's plot is hidden. Moshe, who's the law? The lawgiver is Moshe, right? So if you look in the note, the lawgiver, God chose the area because he knew that Moshe would be interred there in a hidden grave. So Moshe is blessing them. Moshe is blessing them for their unbelievable sacrifice, that they were willing to forego their plot, their territory in the land of Israel, because just to have Moshe's burial place in their land, to them that was as holy as the land of Israel. And so it was a tremendous act of sacrifice, really, from them. So the Shalah writes as follows. He says that the next portion, Maseh, is this portion of the journey. The Torah details all 42 stops that the Jewish people took from the land of Egypt until they came into Israel. So if you look at the beginning of the next portion, continues on page 9, 18, 9, 19. And it's called Eila Maseh. These are the journeys of the children of Israel. And with the Torah is being very precise. The Torah doesn't just tell us the Jews left Egypt and went to Israel. Right? The Torah wants to show that every single detail is actually true. You know, sometimes people can be skeptical. Did the Exodus really happen? Were there really that many Jews in the desert? Did they really stop in all these places? Did all these events that the Torah say happen? That really happened? Here the Torah details that over a period of 40 years, they made 42 journeys. They made 42 encampments. And the Torah details all 42 of them. It reads like a diary, so you can read each one and see where they went, from where they went, the events that happened in each one.
But how could they have not left nothing there that was evidence they've been there for so long?
The Jewish people lived almost in a cocoon. They were surrounded by clouds. The clouds paved the way for them. And kept them. They were almost incubated. So the question is, how did they live? It's obvious that God did not want there to be a record, a physical record, of their miraculous time in the desert. But the Torah records every single physical place, and we know where these places are. The Torah records all 42. A number of these places were very, very short stops. Some of them were for many, many years. Rashi points out another reason why the Torah tells us all these different journeys. The Torah wants to tell us how kind, in a sense, God was to them. Even though God decreed that they're going to be stuck in the desert for 40 years, He didn't move them around the desert. They weren't like nomads, like Bedouins living for 40 years, moving every few days from hut to hut. So Rashi says that out of the 42, 14 of them were in the first year. 8 of them happened after Aaron passed away in the year number 30, in the 40th year. So over a period of 38 years, so there were only 20. Okay? So some of them were for a number of years, some of them were for a very short period of time. But an important lesson to be learned from here is that every time the Jewish people journeyed and camped, Moshe would take apart the entire Mishkan, he would put it up, and then when they would journey again, he would take it all apart again. And the Talmud points out that sometimes, even if it was only for one day, Moshe would take the Mishkan out. He would say, right, it's only for one day. That's the point. Wherever you are at that moment, that's where you're supposed to be. That you're here for one day, take out the whole Mishkan. Tomorrow hasn't happened yet.
And he would carry the Ten Commandments part?
The Mishkan, there were a lot of parts of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was carried by the Levites. Many of it had to be carried on their shoulders. They weren't even allowed to put it on wagons. They carried it on their shoulders, and Moshe himself would be responsible for the Ark, or the Covenant, and the tablets, and Moshe himself would put up the foundations of the Mishkan. Moshe during the 8 days of the inaugural of the Mishkan, Moshe put up and put the suit on the Mishkan himself. He had to do it by himself. Later on, he didn't have to do it himself, but Moshe had to make sure the Mishkan was put up. Even if for the most briefest in the desert, the entire Mishkan was put up. Which teaches us an important lesson that sometimes we say that sometimes the efforts to do something for a very short period of time, why should I when I'm here, when I get to that point, but sometimes we don't know in life a brief encounter for half an hour, a day, we don't know the impact. We have to know that wherever we are, we have to make sure that we create an environment. That when you're on vacation, when you're home, whether it's 1 day or 10 days, the same values that you live by, the same principles, the same Torah, have to be wherever you are. God and Torah they don't take a day off. And God wants to tell Moshe, they say, we're gonna be moving again tomorrow. Let's keep it in the trunk, right? What a schlep. But it doesn't work. That's not how it works. It's today. We have to. We got to daven. If we have to pray, and we need a shul. We need a mishkan to pray, even if it's only for one prayer. Okay, so Matot and Maseh, these two Torah portions. Maseh means journeys, traveling, to move. Matos means tribes. That's what the word Matos means. It begins that Moshe is speaking to the heads of the tribes. In Hebrew, there are two terms for the word tribe. Does anybody know that the word Matos is actually not the most common term that Torah uses when the Torah discusses them?
Shevet.
Shevet or Shvatim. Shevet is singular. They are known as the 12 Shvatim, right? The 12 tribes in Hebrew are known as the 12 Shvatim, or Shevet is single. Why are they called Shvatim, and why are they called Matot? Literally, what a Shevet in Hebrew means is a stick. Shevet means a stick.
Stick?
Yeah.
I thought it's like Shev.
Leshev means to sit.
Yeah.
No.
I thought it was from the root.
Huh?
From that root. The root, Shev.
No.
No?
No. So Shev is a two-letter
Yeah.
shorish. That's it. Shevet is a three-letter shorish, and it means a staff or a stick. Okay? So in Hebrew there are two terms for a stick. Shevet and mateh. Okay? When God tells Moshe to do the miracles, he says to take the term that he uses, take the mateh. Right? When God told him to speak to the rock and Moshe hits the rock, it says that Moshe took the matehu, he took his stick. Right? So why is sometimes the Torah use the word shevet and sometimes you use the word mateh? How do we know that? What's the difference between these two terms that describe the same thing? So interestingly, right? There's nothing random. There's a nuance to the difference between a shevet and a mateh. A shevet is a stick that's still connected in some way to the tree. It's a branch. The reason why the tribes are called shvatim because they are offshoots, they are branches off the tree. Yaakov, right? They're the 12 children of Israel, of Jacob, and they are these branches. That's why they're called shvatim. They're sticks off the tree, offshoots. When a stick is still connected to the tree, it's being nourished by the roots of the tree. It's pliable. It has nourishment. It's softer. A stick that's been broken off, after a while it dries and becomes very, very hard. Right? So there's a difference between a branch and a stick. Right? A stick is lifeless. A stick is hard. A branch still has some connection, right? And for a period of time, even after you cut a branch, it still retains some connection until it totally dries out. So when the Torah discusses Shvatim, the tribes, they're called Shvatim because when they're connected to their source, when the Jewish people are connected spiritually, we are called Shvatim. When we are disconnected, we are called Matot, we are called Mateh, because we are like a stick that's disembodied. It's just a hard stick that shows no connection to its origins, where it came from. So he writes here that in this Torah portion is called Matot, that God calls the Jewish people Matot, not Shvatim, right? What the beginning of the Torah portion is, which is actually the name of the portion, that Moshe speaks to the heads of the tribes, El Rashi HaMatot. He speaks to the heads of the tribes. But it doesn't use the words Rashi HaShvatim, it uses Rashi Matot, because it symbolizes the time now that the Jewish people were in a state of disconnect. So that's why I started at the beginning, that the Haftorah symbolizes a time of disconnect. So if you look at the Haftorahs on page 1193, which is the Haftorah that we're going to recite this Shabbat, and the one next week, 1195, you'll get an inkling of what the Haftarah of Jeremiah of this week, page 1193. You get an inkling of what the kind of prophecy of Jeremiah is. And so
Were the prophets married, or were they devoted to being prophets?
no, the prophets were married.
Did you say were or weren't?
They were.
Okay, yeah.
So I mean, you can see how harsh he is. If you look at on page 1194, verse 26, he calls them different names, like as the shame of a thief when he's discovered, so has the house of Israel been shamed. They, their kings, their princes, their priests, their prophets, they say to wood, you are my father, and to the stone you gave birth to us. I mean, that's how he says you have sunken so low. The whole, he doesn't hold back even from the leaders of the Jewish people, the kings, the princes, the Kohanim. He berates all of them, that all of them had sunken into a very, very low state, which explains why he wasn't the most beloved person, and why Yirmiyah, why he was bitter and his life was bitter. So when we read these two Torah portions, Mattos and Masej together, there's an important lesson here. That Mattos describes a state of disengagement, of disenfranchisement, we're like a dry stick, devoid of inspiration. There's no liquid. We're not connected. There's no sap. We're not connected to our source. We feel disconnected from our history and from inspiration. We're dry. Maseh, right? And this is and the themes of Matot all symbolize that. It's the idea of confusion, and that the fact that even Moshe criticizes them, that they're like their fathers who are wicked, and that's why God put you in the desert for 40 years and put you in exile. And that was a mini exile. The 40 years was the first exile, in a sense, that God kept them in the desert for 40-year exile, and that now we are in a 2,000-year exile still, right? From the Roman banishment of Israel. So Mattos, all the themes of Mattos are about feeling disconnected and holding out for inspiration. Maseh is about journeying. It's about moving. And the Torah is telling us that no matter how far we go, God says you can always come back. That 40 years, 42 journeys, that Maseh tells you that every long journey begins with a small step. It begins once. And sometimes it's another one and another one. That to get to the destination requires a bunch of journeys. There isn't, but it's all part of one big journey. But remember that all your stops, Judaism is not about the destination, it's about the journey. But all your stops have meaning. The fact that you're here today, and the fact that you're in this situation, and sometimes it can only be for one day. take out the Mishkan, take out the Torah. There's a meaning, there's a purpose of why God wants you here right now. Don't think about, I'm only here, I'm in transition, or I'm only here for a short period of time until I'm on to my, I have a plan. There's no plan. The plan is today. God put you here today because God wants you here right now. And while you're here right now, you have to, all the resources and everything that God gives you as a Jew means that you have to unpack it for right now. And so, this is a metaphor, he writes, for life. God puts a soul, God sends a soul down into the world. In his Shema, we all have a soul that God sends down into the world. And the soul does not want to come into this world. The soul actually wants to remain in heaven. Why? Because the challenge the soul knows of what's going to take place. The Talmud describes in the tractate of Nidah, the Talmud describes that God has to make the soul swear. It's actually in Tanya, it's the beginning of the first chapter, that God makes the soul swear that when it comes into this world, to give an oath, to be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha. Because it's very easy, God says in this world, it's very easy to be a rasha, very hard to be a tzaddik.
Rasha?
So, a rasha means to be wicked, to be rasha. So a rasha, right? It's a lot easier to be a rasha than to be a tzaddik. So God makes every neshama before it comes to this world make an oath that you do your utmost to be a tzaddik. And then it says, "Vafilu, even if everyone tells you tzaddik ata, hayeh benecha karasha," and if everybody says, "Oh, you're such a great guy, you're a tzaddik," in your mind, always think of yourself as a rasha. Don't put yourself on a high horse. Be humble, and this way right? Because once you think you've made it, that's the beginning of your downfall. So, Talmud describes this idea that the soul has to be forced into this world. The soul doesn't want to come into this world, because the soul in the garden in Gan Eden in heaven is connected to God, and so the question is, what utility, what advantages that come into this world that I should try to be a tzaddik? In heaven, I'm already a tzaddik. So what do I have to come to this world to try to be a tzaddik? So, as we understand that whole journey of the soul, that God forces it in a Shema, God sends an angel to force the angel. In Kabbalah it says that's one of the reasons why a baby cries. As soon as the moment that it's born, the baby cries. It's the soul crying that doesn't want to be in this world, right? The angel literally has to push it in, and it comes out crying because it knows the tremendous challenge of the life that it's facing, right? And so Kabbalah says after a while the baby calms down and it gets used to it. And then it starts to smile, and starts to laugh. And sometimes it can laugh for 80, 90, 100, 120 years. And then one day the angel comes knocking on the door and says, "All right, the party's over. It's time to go home. It's time to go back." And then the baby starts to cry again. "No, I'm not ready to go home." Right? But the angel says, "What do you mean? You were crying. You didn't want to come with it." "I know, because I was afraid, but now I got used to it." Right? So that, the Kabbalah says those are the two times really that we cry, when we come into the world and when it's time to leave this world. In between we cry over silly things, but existential crying, right, happens at the beginning and the end, because what happens is in the beginning the soul cannot imagine what purpose there can be to come into this world, to have the challenge, because if you fail, then what was the purpose? Life, I had a pure origin. But at the end of life, the soul realizes that, as it says in Pirkei Avot, one moment of doing a favor for somebody, one moment of teshuvah and masim tovim is better than the infinity of the world to come. To come for one moment of this week, because in the next world, there are no mitzvot. In the next world, there is no tzedakah. In the next world, there is no giving somebody a kind word, being of comfort to somebody. So what a person can achieve in this world, a neshama without a body can't achieve. But nevertheless, it's called Yerida L'Tzarech Aliyah. It's a descent for a greater something afterwards. So the soul comes down, because what it's told is, yes, it's a mission fraught with difficulty. But if you are successful, you will have achieved something that's so great that you can't achieve in heaven. If you fail, then it wasn't worth it. But if you succeed, the success is so much more powerful than anything that a soul can achieve without going into the body form of this world. So the soul comes in, and some souls are like Shevets. They're connected. They feel connected to their source. They live every day, or the majority of their life. They feel like they have a mission. They have a sense of mission. They're connected to something. And then there are many souls that become like matas. They become like sticks. Once upon a time, every stick was a branch. Once upon a time, every stick was part of a living, healthy tree that was connected to the roots. What makes a tree healthy? Strong roots. So once upon a time, every stick had a sense of purpose, had a sense of being. But at some point, it got broken. And it got disconnected, and sometimes it happens over a couple of years. Sometimes it takes a couple of generations. It's not always the stick's fault. Sometimes the parent of the stick chopped the stick off, and one day the stick wakes up and says, "Hey, I used to be a tree, and now I have no feeling. I have no sensitivity to anything of a tree. I don't bear any resemblance to a tree. I don't look like a tree, and I don't grow. I'm static, and I'm like rock, hard like a rock." So God, this is the connection to this time, that this is how the Jewish people felt. And when God said Jeremiah to that, they felt like right. But God says, yes, you can feel like a stick, but God has even sticks can come back. That's why God tells Moshe. That's why God gives Moshe so many missions with a stick. Moshe needs a stick. What was the stick doing? Moshe just say a prayer, and it's going to come. Moshe needs a stick to hit the Nile. Moshe needs a stick to hit a rock. What is the stick? Moshe, when he couldn't walk straight, he was always carrying a stick. And the Torah we're not. What is this? Voodoo, magic? Moshe didn't wave a wand. What does Moshe need a stick for in the first place? The symbolism is that God told Moshe that you have to show the Jewish people that a stick, when God tells it to do something, even a stick becomes alive. No person should ever feel that you're too dried up that you can't hear the word of God anymore. The word of God can penetrate lifelessness and transform it into something alive. And this is why we combine these two Torah portions together to teach us that even sticks can go on a journey, right? And the journey it takes time, but we can reach our destination by recognizing that every step is meaningful, even if it's minor. Don't discount the small things. As long as you're keeping on moving and you're going, you're on a journey, you're alive, and you're moving forward. That's what God wants you to do. That's your mission. And so sometimes people say, it's only this, it's only half an hour, so I only have time to study for 5 minutes, I only have time to pray for a minute, or I didn't have a good day yesterday. We can't get discouraged. The journey from Egypt to Israel has 42 stops along the way, and some of them are 20 years long, and some of them are 15 minutes. Each one of them, though, is important. Okay, go.
I was wondering what the symbolism or connection with Aaron's staff when it
Blossomed and
blossoms.
become almonds.
How did, yeah.
So the almond. So Rashi writes that because almonds it grows in 21 days. It's the fastest growing. The blossoms from a bud to an almond to the fruit takes 21 days, and that's why God wanted him to know that the speed of it can take place. Now 21 days. What's 21 days? It's 3 weeks, right? It's the 3 weeks of time. It corresponds. What do you say?
Half of 42, but
Correct. Yes, but the symbolism of it is that Jeremiah in his prophecy. Is that what you were referring to, or were you looking to Aaron's staff in the beginning?
no, I was just thinking back to Aaron's staff. I mean, talking about a dry staff.
Right. So yeah. So Aaron's staff was that was the miracle. That Aaron's stick was a mate. Aaron was a stick. It was lifeless, and the next morning it blossomed and it grew into almonds. But the idea of almonds, Rashi writes, is because that God says sometimes you think it takes a long time from lifelessness to life can take a long time. Almonds are in 21 days it goes from nothing from the bud to the fruit. But if you look at the Haftorah, I'm pretty sure Jeremiah uses that imagery. If you look on page 1192, this was the first prophecy that Jeremiah had. This was the Haftarah we read last Shabbat. On page 1192. So this is the first. So at the beginning, Jeremiah says, he says, I'm a child. I don't want to do this. If you look at verse 6, Jeremiah says, Lord, I don't know how to speak. I am but a lad. You see the similarities to what Moshe? Moshe also couldn't speak, right? Moshe told God, I can't speak well. God chooses people who can't speak because the message is coming from God. Right? God doesn't need orators. God makes them. It's the message. It's not the composition. And God says, what it says, Hashem says, do not say that. Wherever I send you, you shall go. Whatever I command you, you shall speak. Fear not, because I am with you. And he says, God touched my mouth, right? You see, Hashem said, when Hashem touched my mouth, he said, behold, I've placed my words in your mouth. When I touched you, my words went into your mouth. And now I'm appointing you this day over the nations, over kingdoms, to uproot and to smash and destroy. And this is the first prophecy that God gives them. The word of Hashem was upon me, saying, what do you see? I said, I see an almond wood staff, do I see. And Hashem said to me, no, you have seen well. Why? For I shall hasten regarding my word. Because the almond staff symbolizes taking something that's wood and turning it into an almond. It happens overnight. And the next morning it's already budding. Right? And so the symbolism that Jeremiah uses, the same symbolism of Aaron's staff, that when God wants something to happen, he doesn't need capable people. He doesn't need big speakers. He doesn't need professors. He takes a nobody. He puts the words in his mouth. He can take a stick and turn it into an almond right away. So this is the similarities between Moshe and Yirmiyah are very, very powerful. But Yirmiyah was looked back and wanted to use the same excuse that I can't do it. I can't string a sentence together. I'm incompetent. I'm dyslexic. Whatever. So all the things, right? And God says, I don't need a savvy person, because it's actually the reverse. That's how you know the message is pure. Someone whose message is pure penetrates. When you hear people speak with a lot of flowery language to get across a very simple message, right? It detracts actually from the actual message. God chose people that people say, oh, the Jews were mesmerized by Moses. He must have been like Martin Luther King. He must have been a powerful orator, and he mesmerized them with his message. No, it wasn't about Moshe. Moshe was a vehicle. It was God's message, and the purity of it. That's why the Jewish people, we say every single day in prayer, "Vayaminu b'Adonai u'v'Moshe avdo." They believed in God and in Moshe, because they saw that Moshe was not someone who took a speech and fancied it up, and it wasn't Moshe's charisma, it wasn't Moshe's gifts that captured the Jewish people. That people could say that we were wrapped in some kind of cult, and that Moshe was this brilliant leader. And there are all these theories and Bible scholars and scientists who say that Moshe was this amazing guy who grew up in a palace and he was slaves, and he had this mesmerizing effect on them. Right? It could have been if Moshe was that gifted, but the Torah itself testifies that Moshe could speak. Moshe said it admits he couldn't speak. So what held him? How did Moshe, right? Being able to give a speech, well, present politics aside, that doesn't make you a great leader. But the fact of the matter is that the message of Moshe was the message of Hashem. The message of Yirmiyah, Yirmiyah spoke, they knew it wasn't Yirmiyah speaking because Jeremiah can't speak. So what was coming out? It was God's message, and that's why it resonated, because it came from a place where people realized that the words that were coming were pure. And the Talmud says that Hizar b'nei anim, it says Shebehem tetzet Torah. The Talmud says give a lot of respect to the children of poor people, because from them the most true Torah comes forth. Because true Torah comes from a place where you give up, you make sacrifice, you have to give up a lot, right? The Torah of comfort has a lot of layers to it, where people's personality and people's thoughts become too intertwined with Torah. But the idea is that there's a certain purity of Torah. That's why in Pirkei Avos it says if you really want to find success in Torah, you have to minimize all your other pursuits in life. It says pas b'melech tochel, eat a little bread and salt. Umayim, I'm sure, bread and water, right? You can't be, if you're knee deep in in steak and wine, it runs counter to the message of Torah, of refinement. All right. I didn't say steak just to make you happy. I'm just saying.
That's fine.
That,
I recognize there's many different points of view in life.
no, just the opposite. I was saying eating steak is counterproductive to studying Torah.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.